And we are live. Hi, my name is Dave. I will be your host for tonight's event, which is The Elements of Style, Crafting Your Unique Photography Style with Jonathan Zoeteman. Now, this event is sponsored by Canon Canada. We're excited about that. If you have registered for this event, we will be sending out an email with an exclusive Canon bonus offer. Now, if you didn't register for this event and you're feeling left out, don't worry about it. Simply send Evelyn an email, which is evelyn@thecamerastore.com, and she will look after you, and you get an email there and get in on that promotion there. Now, there is a bunch of work that goes on behind the scenes here. Tonight we have the TCS Live Dream Team, Drew and Graham, which are working hard behind the scenes here, and hopefully it goes off without a hitch, and we look fantastic. That's the goal tonight. So a big part of what I like about live streaming is the interaction with everybody. So we have, my panelist is right beside me. I'll introduce him in a second. But we also have the interaction with everybody online. So if you are in the chat, you're more than welcome to post questions. We do have Russ Brown from Canon who's in there with us. He'll be answering your technical questions about Canon gear, but we also will be composing a bunch of questions for our guest tonight. We will ask throughout his presentation, as well at the end we'll have a Q&A presentation there as well. So if you don't want to be part of the chat, feel free to email me, simply dave@thecamerastore.com. Pretty simple that way. Now, if you are not already familiar with our guest tonight, Jonathan Zoeteman is a Canadian lifestyle portrait and travel photographer, drawing inspiration from film, narrative, and creative expression. Along with commercial, editorial, and lifestyle photography, Jonathan is passionate about building community and supporting other creators with the development of spaces, events, education, and workshops through Socality, creative community, as a Canon ambassador through the Canon Creator Lab. He also has worked with some big names. Canon, of course, Profoto, Ford Canada, Eddie Bauer, Canadian Tire, Marriott International, and a whole lot more. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're happy to have you here. So, what are we to expect tonight? The elements of style. I mean, you're much stylish than me. I can't pull off a backwards baseball cap like that.
I'll give you the background. Yeah, we were chatting about this one a few months ago. I had the privilege of doing a talk with McBain, rivals from Edmonton.
Oh, yeah.
They're great people, though. I got to share some of my process and just kind of what goes into capturing portraits kind of anywhere in different spaces. Right. And so we were just talking about what's a need that a lot of people have, and I kind of didn't want to just repeat the same thing, right? So I've had a lot, I know when I was starting out, and even like all the way through, I think I really looked up to people who had a distinctive kind of established look and feel, and it's something still as that's been something I've developed. You'll get people, hey, what's your preset? How did you get that look? And I think it's important, I just felt like there's so much value in, I hope people who are interested in portrait photography and all that are going to learn a little bit about how I do what I do as well. But I wanted to package this tonight kind of in the realm of style, kind of provide a few little case studies. I'm actually going to compare and contrast with another local photographer.
Wow. And, that's good.
So yeah.
That's good. Well, I've seen some of your images. They look fantastic. So let's get right into it.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks, guys. So, yeah, as Dave said, I am a portrait photographer based out of Calgary here. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now. I'm going to give you a little bit of my story. But my hope kind of in this short, probably 45 to the next 50 minutes, is that you'll get a little bit of my background, kind of my journey to establishing a bit of my own signature style when it comes to my photography. And then hopefully giving you a few tools to kind of understand how to ask questions, how to kind of deconstruct your own work. So yeah, we'll get into it. My story, I never planned to be a photographer. I went to business school here in Calgary at U of C, did a finance degree actually. A few years later went back, did an MBA. So I have 2 business degrees. Growing up, I think I actually was more interested in music and writing and graphic design, was into skateboarding and all these different things. None of them which were photography. My first kind of interaction with the camera was actually just like camcorders filming my friends skateboarding, and that was kind of the slight subtle entry into visuals. But I had the privilege in 2012, I was doing some volunteering in kind of stage of my life shortly out of university. Like a lot of people, started to travel a little bit and had the opportunity to go to Cambodia with some friends. We were volunteering with this organization, building a playground actually near the border of like Thailand and Cambodia. And I'd picked up this Canon 60D before this trip and had brought it with me, kit lens, just still really didn't know what I was doing, but I'll save the long story for another time. But long story short, took this image, didn't even kind of notice in the moment when everything was happening, kind of that I'd snapped it. And I just remember kind of looking back, scrolling through the images on the back of the screen and seeing this one. And it just kind of jumping out to me at the time, almost like I was looking at, I mean, I'm more critical of it now, but at the time it was this kind of like,
It's a wow moment, right?
It was this I was like, that kind of feels like Nat Geo-esque or something. I remember thinking, right? Like we all probably as photographers had those.
No, I don't have
those, those moments where you take something and you're like, I took that? Did I take that? And so that was that first moment for me. Still had no desire to be a photographer, was just kind of, picked up the camera like a lot of people. But then 2014, I ended up meeting Scott Backen, who's done a workshop with you guys before, and I work with now with Socality. And he had kind of started this whole creative community, brought a bunch of people together. Instagram was just kind of taking off, and I remember in connecting with him, I started meeting all these folks that were going out to the mountains, creating, and it's funny because as we're talking about style tonight, and even looking back, like this was fall 2014. So this would have been, I'd say early 2014 was when I started kind of getting into Instagram, picking up, the camera more. So I was fully in the Instagram world at this point. That was still very much my entry into photography. But I was the person that just felt like I needed to add something, We would go on these hikes and I would get these crazy ideas, like I'm gonna bring a helium tank with a bunch of balloons and try and shoot something with balloons like up on a hike, like, and it sounds like it's funny because I look back and some of them I find a little bit ridiculous, but I was having fun at the time. But when I think about style, I think that's why I wanted to show this. Like, I was already somebody that liked to kind of get creative or juxtapose or try to play with things that weren't maybe just what was there, even like almost day one when I started picking up a camera. And so, flash forward, I was spending a lot of time with a lot of adventure photographers and folks. So a lot of what I was around to shoot was adventure and travel, and so my work kind of took that look.
Were you very much like a visual guy before that, or like even though you weren't a photographer or into photography yet, were you very much visually sort of oriented?
Not so I had a bit of design background. So out of I had started a few company like small little businesses. So I think design was definitely, I had a bit of an eye there, and naturally I think even before any of this gravitated probably to composition and some of that, but not particularly. And so so that kind of moved me into that phase, and I think just I'll touch on this in the summary, but my style was also somewhat shaped by the people I was shooting with, right? A lot of my friends were outdoor photographers or adventure photographers or travel photographers. And so it wasn't surprising to me that even though maybe I was trying to put my take or my spin, which usually involved a human subject in some capacity, I always had to have a person, involved in the imagery in some way. It still very much fit within, I would consider like the travel and adventure kind of vein. And at times it wasn't, I would say it was somewhat unique, but I was still trying to establish, I think, me, and who I was. 2019, I had a chance, again, primarily I think through my Instagram, my Instagram work and the stuff, my activity on the platform, to work with a phone company. Actually, they're based out of China, called Oppo. and they invited me along with like a whole bunch of creators, some of who I actually like really looked up to. So I was kind of like, oh, why'd you guys choose? You know, like there's this like, okay, cool. I'll say yes to that. And so had a chance to go to Tokyo, and I'd never been.
Wow.
Again, my familiarity was more with like national parks and, you know, what we've got in our backyard here, like the Banff and all these places, and ended up in Tokyo for 5 days, 4 nights. So really short trip. But had to shoot a photo, shoot and share a photo a day with a phone. Mostly with most of my opportunity being like at night or after hours or in different spaces. And so that process, fully kind of pushed me out of my comfort zone, I think. And I look back, you know, for me as a very clear pivot point for where my style adapted or started to change a little bit, or I started to kind of, I think, see things a little bit differently.
Well, it's a huge change in environment for you. I mean, we are so spoiled with what we have around us here, right? As far as like nature and wildlife, right? We're unbelievably spoiled. But when you go to a big city, right, and you know, like Calgary's okay, right, but it's nothing compared to like New York or Tokyo or something like that, right? So for us, it's this amazing, inspirational sort of material.
Well, and I think we don't realize we're living in constraint, or that we've placed a constraint around what we're capable of, or what we would shoot because we're only familiar with something. I was living in a very kind of, and I think it's the negative, and I'll speak to this, of social media a little bit, especially for folks that are maybe doing more or started out more on social media. If you're in commercial world or you're shooting in different spaces, sometimes that doesn't exist, you know, as much. But definitely if you're living in the social media space or consuming a lot of stuff on social media, there's a tendency that what you see is a certain look, a certain style, and even a certain crop. You know, I was like guilty of shooting so much vertical. You know, it's like people getting pushed into vertical video now, right? I was in that place, photographically, and so I think just, you know, I'll continue, but my encouragement is for people who are in a place where you feel kind of stuck. You know, you feel like you've been doing the same thing, you know there's more, but you don't really know what that looks like. Sometimes it is a change of scenery, or it's planning that trip or doing that thing, or or just, even if you don't have the money or you don't have the, you know, just shooting or creating something in your own city, or like, you know, doing something that fully pulls you out of your comfort zone can really be the thing that kind of takes you to that next.
I've heard not just location,
level.
but even like picking up a new piece of gear, trying out a new lens. If you're shooting nothing but a certain zoom range, suddenly getting out of your comfort zone and shooting a completely different lens, right?
Yeah.
And it makes you sort of see the world differently.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually bring up gear after on that, so that's a good.
I didn't see that slide, by the way.
Good little teaser for later. But yeah, so continuing on, I included these just because I think it's kind of an interesting echo. This was July 2020. Kind of still pandemic, you know, was trying to get creative outdoors, you know, with folks, you know, after, you know, having been, you know, cooped up for a bit. And, but I look at this and these images, and I'm reminded that in a sense, they're not that different from the girl with the balloons in 2014. You know, it's obviously like my technique was growing, my composition was, you know, getting better, like maybe the subjects I'm working with, you know, are different. But I realized, even as I was like preparing for all of this, it's interesting to see the themes that we gravitate to as creative people carry through, right? And so, yeah, 2020 continuing to kind of, find that. And then this year, 2022, summer, after a year of not shooting that much, I had a chance, I was just telling Dave, to take a trip to the Canary Islands this summer and just shoot some stuff for fun, to be honest, after not having done that for a little while. So, but again, like current, but also imagery that echoes to some of those, you know, moments in the past, right? And so,
well, it's sort of a constant refinement and a learning, right? As you kind of grow as a photographer.
Totally. And so, for me personally, like as I look back, the common threads have been people. I know I've always gravitated to capturing, a person before a landscape. I enjoy being in landscapes, but they don't inspire me like people do.
Yep.
I love story and narrative and trying to capture something that evokes an emotion or asks a question or anything like that. And I love telling stories of people in their environment or capturing people in an environment. So I think that's why maybe, I admire studio photographers. And that's a step that I think I need in terms of comfort zone, branch into. But I've always gravitated to places and natural places, even whether it's a city or a room or but just spaces that we exist in, right? Yeah. So a few lessons, just kind of as I look back on my own journey. One is your style's a reflection of you. We were just talking about this before, that sometimes the tendency can be to, look at other people's work, or I think it's especially tough if you work in an industry where you're constantly creating for other people. But ultimately, as you're working towards establishing a clear style for yourself, it starts and ends with you and who you are, your personality, and it should be a reflection of what you love and the things you love, an amalgamation of who you are. I know that's been the case for me. It has been a product of I love people, so that doesn't surprise me. I think I've realized I really love juxtaposition and I love contrast, and so that's something that has woven into my work. Second is your style is shaped by your influences and your peers. I think absolutely what we consume influences what we create. So if you're not, and in a good way, I think oftentimes we were talking about this as well, but I think it's okay to consume a lot of good work and use that as a launch point to then riff on it and make it your own, right? Nothing's original, really, almost everything starts, somewhere with some inspiration from something we've seen or experienced.
So, seeing it as a launch point, looking at other people's work and other artists, that was a great way to put it. And it sort of changed how I think about things a little bit there, because I was never really wanting to copy somebody else or feel like I'm imitating somebody, but using them as inspiration to launch my own vision was fantastic. So that was a good
Totally, and I'm with you. I'm somebody, especially now, where if there's even a remote chance that what I'm creating looks like what somebody else might create, it the artist in me cringes or shies away. But I think it's important to recognize that there is nothing wrong with starting somewhere. Some of the stuff that's inspired me most, or that I felt has ended up being most original, actually started with some other photo that somebody took at some point that then launched me into seeing something, or and so I think we're all a product of that. And then that also ties in, we just did a workshop over the weekend with Canon, and they had a futures program. So I got to spend a lot of time with some great up and coming creators. Sweet. And people 18 to 24 that are really kind of, getting started in their careers.
But they're all shooting film, right?
all film shooters now. No, they were all shooting R6. But one of them had just mentioned a quote just at the table, and he was just talking about that quote that was you're a product of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. And I think our creativity, who you shoot with, who you go out, we are, especially when you're getting started, I know how much I was influenced by that. So I guess the encouragement is if you're still trying to find it, gravitate and put yourself around people who maybe you don't want to be just like them, but you admire their style or the way they kind of work or shoot or what they create. And you'll be surprised at how you'll borrow a little bit from that. My style is literally a borrowing from this, a borrowing from this. I love the compositions of that person. I love the look of this, And before you know it, you're this Frankenstein that's you, but it's got all this inspiration that looks original, right? And last, just your style shaped by practice. I was joking with Graham, who's behind the camera here, beforehand. I said I could probably, digest this entire presentation down into just do the work. Obviously, I'm gonna hopefully.
So we still got 45 minutes to go.
It's hopefully give you a little more than that, but I can't underscore just how important it is to get the reps in. And too often when I get people that are, hey, do you have a preset? Hey, can I get this? Or just looking for that like one-click stylized look. I can tell the difference between the person that's put in the work and their images and everything they've put in, then match the color or add to the, to their post edit or their, right? You can't start with, oh, I've got this cool color grade, and what's underneath it is not at the level that you'd be proud of. And so, yeah, practice. This came out of our conversations actually this weekend, so I thought I'd share it. I like those easy to remember. This is 3 hours for you, and it's just repetition, which I just spoke on, getting your reps in, relationship, the people who are around you, and then a little bit of an addition, and that's rest. I think so much of our creative journey is cyclical, and you go on these massive growth, like little growth spikes, and then you'll kind of stay often in one place or a similar kind of place for quite a while. And burnout's a real thing. A lot of us, I think, can relate to absolutely going through loving what we're creating, hating it completely, like wanting to, and I think the key, like the journey I'm on is just finding that rest rhythm in the midst of it, because when you're like refreshing, if you're doing this full time or you're creating for a living, having those moments to go make something for yourself, to go get out and shoot just for the fun of it, or if you're just shooting for the fun of it, like stopping when you need to stop, like getting that sleep, all of those things, and then coming back, getting your reps, finding those new relationships.
You just got a great comment here. I got a shout out. Chuck Betts here says, "You become a Frankenstein if you create a Frankenstyle."
Ooh, Chuck.
Kudos to Chuck. That was good.
Yeah,
I like that.
So yeah, those 3 hours, repetition, relationship, and rest. Don't forget the rest. I think it's a very non-photography piece, but I think we're actually most creative when we prioritize that kind of rhythm. So I'm gonna shift gears. We're gonna kind of get into a bit more practical.
Okay.
What I called Irene Rudnick this afternoon.
She's a fantastic photographer.
She's incredible.
Yeah.
I think she's such a great example locally and just in general of someone who's established a very distinctive style and look. If Irene's photo popped up anywhere on, I would immediately know it's an Irene photo. Yeah. And I've seen plenty of people that have, tried to are inspired and have shot similar stuff, but I would say it's safe to say I always know it's Irene versus someone who tried to even shoot like Irene.
True.
Which is something that is kind of what we're getting at, right? Like you can shoot like someone, but you can't be them, right?
No.
So that's why the whole goal here is not for you to look at my work or Irene's work or anybody else's work and say, oh, how can I make it look more like that? My goal here is that you get inspired to pull from the different things you learn from everybody and then make that your own.
Yeah.
But anyways, we had a chat because we were together over the weekend, and we were joking how she's always being sassy to people in the comments. And I had to screenshot this one. He says, all your pictures somehow always just look the same. And Irene says that's called having a style. And so with that,
some sass there, some serious sass.
She's got some sass. I wanted to kind of give you guys a practical example. And I think for those of you that are portrait photographers especially, this might be, really hands-on. But I think hopefully what I'm going to go through, you can kind of pull different tools based, whatever you're shooting. But Irene and I, obviously both based in Calgary, we're both at a point now where we're pretty comfortable just kind of shooting wherever. We both love just on a whim kind of planning a creative shoot. And we have some of the same friends who hop in front of the camera for us. So I thought that for tonight, this would be a kind of a cool exercise to kind of show you guys two very different styles, myself and Irene, one shoot from both of us. Now, I had more access to some of my photos than hers. I just pillaged them from Instagram. So, apologies, Irene, if I show less breadth of your work than what I have from my shoot. But all that to say, I want to kind of go through these elements of style, we're going to go through 7 kind of categories, and I'm just going to kind of use this shoot with the same subject with Lesha here to kind of walk you through, like, yeah, my approach and how these elements kind of contribute to defining a very signature look, and hopefully you can kind of adapt them, you know, to your own use. So. Elements of Style, I also borrowed that title from the book, The Elements of Style. That's a writing book, but I felt it's appropriate.
It was inspiration from everything.
Yeah,
right?
we're drawing, we're stealing. It's like, what, good artists good artists borrow, great artists steal, right? So 7 elements that we're going to cover tonight. I don't think this is by any means comprehensive. These are just some elements I felt I draw on quite a bit that have impacted my style and that I think, you know, you can use. So we're going to go through environment, light, composition, styling and props, movement, color, and gear. I know it sounds like a lot, but we will move through it fairly efficiently. How are we doing for time?
We're good, man.
Like
we're
25
good.
minutes in?
Yeah, 25 minutes. We just
sailing.
get started.
We're sailing. Okay. So environment. For me, this is like huge because obviously, like, as you guys have seen, I'm more of I don't think technically I can call myself an environmental portrait, like portrait taker. But I love capturing, like, environment's huge. Environment's kind of number one for me when I start planning a shoot. And so for me, it's the canvas. Environment sets the tone. It's kind of the background.
Fair enough.
And so, you know, but it's also so that's why I wanted to begin with environment, because it's kind of where I start. But we're going to go through all of them. So, you know, when Irene kind of chooses a location, and we'll get there to gear, because obviously that, like we're going to jump to gear later.
Yeah.
You know, you can tell even in this image, closer focal length. She loves 85.
She loves 85.
I love about
85-1.2. Can't go wrong with that.
85-1.2. I'm a big 35-1.4 guy over here.
When's Canon bringing out?
I'm waiting for that 1.2.
Send a question to Russ at Canon. When's the 35-1.4
He's like, no gear, no unreleased gear questions. But all that to say, so like lens choice, we'll get there. But in both of these cases, right? Like regular locations in Calgary. Irene's in a park. I'm literally at Mahogany Lake.
Yeah.
A little in my process for stuff like this. So many locations for me environmentally are found when I'm not actually looking for a location. And I would say it's probably the case for her, but definitely for me, I was literally out paddleboarding with some friends on Mahogany Lake.
You're like, this looks amazing.
At this time of day, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I'm looking and I see the light just hitting like warm, right? And we'll get into this with color, right? But I'm getting to the point where I start to know what tonal colors I like in my images.
Right.
And looking at the cement wall, looking at the way that the light was dancing, immediately I'm like, okay, this is a spot I have to shoot. And so Lesha just happened to be in town. She was like, hey, want to shoot? So like, I think she shot with Irene probably the same week. So the fun part is like, these were probably shot within like a week or so of each other. And so anyways, that's kind of that's often for me, the scouting process, how that works. But as you can tell, the location and the environment also sets the tone for the color, right? So when we're talking about style, like I gravitate to certain colors, certain, you know, tonal qualities. So does Irene, right? So I think I'll leave it there because this kind of segues into light. But again, this comes back to the color grading and kind of editing question. So everybody's always like, hey, what's your edit? I love your edit. How did you get these colors? And, you know, again, circling back to this weekend, I was sitting down around a table with Garrett King, his Instagram short stash. He's kind of built a whole, I think, reputation even around his color grade and his look and his style. And
right.
But we were talking, and I think so many people, you know, I mean, were trying to just copy his look or his, again, color grade, while not recognizing that so much of what goes into your color and your tonal quality of your image is actually shot in camera. It's actually shot on location. It's not just the way that you color grade or post edit, and so, for me, it does come down to light. I think, as first phase, Irene loves to capture, like for her style, she loves backlit.
Yeah.
And so this photo on the right, I like grabbed that one from the from the batch because like, oh yeah, they got that like halo and the glow and
Yeah.
and so when you think like she's interacted with light enough to recognize, okay, I love for the style and this like feminine kind of portraiture, like ethereal look. She loves backlit, and it works perfectly for the look that she's trying to create, right? I've found almost on the complete opposite that I'm very inspired often by fashion photography from, like a variety of different inspirations, right?
Totally.
And often they really lean into a mixture of harsh light, but I also love the warmth that comes with like sunset or something that's a little softer than midday,
Right.
But leaning into more, directionally, like hitting your subject, from a more like from the front. And so, sorry, I'm jumping around. And so that's kind of like light positioning, time of day, but for me also, and I mentioned this is one carryover from McBain. A key that I think a lot of people miss when they're talking about light is like the color and the temperature. Like obviously when we're looking at natural light, the sun, different times of day you get different tonal qualities.
Yeah.
And then it's key also, just as a side note, I'm a big fan of manual white balance or like shooting in Kelvin.
Yeah.
To really dial in the exact color temperature you want.
I don't think people do that enough, actually, and on the creative side, right? We often are trying to find the perfect white balance, and so we're bringing gray cards and everything else, but we can explore otherwise.
And for me, it's pretty field driven. Like on my R5, I've programmed one of the dials just to be a white balance dial. And so part of getting that look or the colors I want, because I find, I don't know about you guys, but if you just shoot auto white balance all the time, if there is a bit of a band, even if you're shooting in RAW, of where you're working, right? And so for me, if like, again, this comes back to your color and your edits already kind of being baked into your shot. The closer you can get to getting that image the way you want it before you move it into post-production, the closer you're gonna get to that sort of color profile. So these images here, just kind of a follow-up, but this was a bit of an aha moment when I was in Japan, just the color temperature of like fluorescent lights are so different. Like every fluorescent can look different, right? And so just training your eye to see light as color and recognizing that not all light is created equal. I think we understand that in like a studio setting, but a lot of people I don't think take that into available light, right? And so when it comes down to crafting your look and your style, it's important to kind of notice what color of light am I attracted to? What do I tend to shoot? What time of day do I tend to shoot, right?
Yeah, some fluorescents are like harsh green, right?
Yeah.
And others are sort of a more daylight green.
Some are more purpley, some are more,
And depending on the color of the walls around it, for instance, right, it's going to pick up the color of that. So lots of different styles you can kind of play with. But yeah, playing with your white balance, that's good.
Yeah, so I'm just rapid firing, but
that's all right, man.
But yeah, so I think like to summarize the light, I think it's huge when you're kind of still finding that. Like I think it's so important in this discovery process. I mean, at all stages, but definitely you go in those bursts where it's like, hey, try it all. Like shoot the different types, and then start to notice what you love. Like what do you keep coming back to? If it's Irene, it's like, okay, she kept coming back to backlight, right? And it started to distinctively define her look.
Yeah.
I find that, I gravitate to certain light, certain time of day, and so I think it's like keep playing, and then as you start to find it, then take it a little deeper. But then I think we go through phases where then you gotta expand again, right? And we could, maybe touch on that, towards the end. But number 3 is composition. And I'm not going to get into like we're not going to get into like crazy compositional tools or rule of thirds or any of that fun stuff. Like, but what I want to talk about more is just how we utilize composition in, and beyond composition, like framing and perspective and all of that in crafting, kind of a consistent look and a feel and how we, use that. And I'm going to touch on two things, which I think is sort of me and Irene as an example. One's consistency. Well, they're both consistent, but I think you can be consistent in similarity where you are known for similar consistent compositions. Or I think where I kind of drift is my thing almost that I look for is unique compositions. So I'm actually part of my style, I would say, that I've tried to develop is to look for the different composition or the frame or the something.
Yeah, well, consistency is really, it's your comfort zone too, right? I know I can get results out of this, right? Irene knows what situation she needs to get the results she wants. You have the same thing, right? I know if
Absolutely.
I walk into a room and I'm like, here's what I need to get out of this, right? I know what I'm comfortable with, but what if I push it a little bit? So we often get some keepers and then we start experimenting. Right?
Totally. And so I think like we talked and using this image of hers on the right, so critical for her, especially within her toolkit, which we'll get to gear shortly, but is background, middle, like subject, and then foreground to create, because depth, like she's a master at creating depth, right? And that's something that she's realized compositionally and framing wise, that those are sort of those key elements that contribute to that style of shot. For me, I think I'm always looking, because I'm shooting wider usually, right? So I'm usually 35.
So the environment's going to play a much bigger factor.
So now,
period. That the field is drastically different with a wider angle lens.
Completely.
Right?
And so for me, then it becomes more about consistency, but in the way that I'm like. So as a photographer, I'm looking so much more at defining a consistent look, but through the way I capture a frame, through the a lot of that's actually informed, I would say, by cinematographers or watching movies or like looking. And so for me, it's like I'm trying to think when I'm shooting more from that frame of reference and establish a style that's informed by film type composition, right? And so again, consistency, but consistency in slightly different directions. But I think the key is consistency, that as you build that toolkit, you're being consistent with it. Consistent, yeah. Couple more shots just to kind of from that shoot that just as an example of just composition play. But again, for me, it's this was inspired, I think, almost directly from a trip years ago where a photographer I definitely looked up to and respected. I was busy shooting One Direction, getting that like Instagram shot with the little, with the nice view and the little center frame.
The safe shot.
The safe shot, the predictable one. And he said, if you look around, there's probably 20 good shots like around you, but you just got to actually like dig for them, right? And I think that's defined sort of my style. And I'm going to get to that kind of at the end, because depending on the personality type you are, you'll actually fall into probably one of a couple categories. And so, but all that to say, to conclude, number 3, just consciously consume the work of others. And I encourage you to look at how they use perspective, composition, and framing techniques. And so I think for me, the biggest way I've learned is like movies, again, as an active eye, watching how a cinematographer, a DP, or director frames a shot, and then great photos, and then borrow,
Well, you really see whatever visual medium it is, what really hits home. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, you look at like classic painters and stuff, right? Why does this painting work better than this painting for you? So you get drawn inspiration from all kinds of visual medium, and movies are fantastic.
Totally, right? And especially if it's movies that are similar in style to maybe the type of work you like to shoot or what you like to create, right? So, but yeah, number 4, so styling and props. props and styling is an interesting one. Obviously, if you're a landscape photographer, you're somebody that, completely moot. But for most people that are doing anything with people, whether it's, even if it's action or you're shooting, what's in the frame, what's happening is a massive part, of creating a cohesive kind of.
I heard something a long time ago. A customer was on a seminar, and she came back from the seminar. I said, "What did you learn?" And she says, "The biggest thing I learned was that you're responsible for everything in the shot." And I'm like, "Oh, that's important, right?" Because often people forget about an object that might be distracting, right? So when you start really looking at your images a lot more, you are responsible for everything. You don't want it to be distracting, right? When you first look at an image, where does your eye go to? What does it dart around to? Right? Is it distracted by the classic tree coming out of somebody's head, right? Is that what's bugging you about this photo? So you have to watch all these things. And I think as a photographer, the more time you spend shooting, the more you start seeing these subtleties and these nuances, and that's when you really start making some big progress in your own style.
Yeah. No, that's good, Dave.
Well, thanks, man.
Dave's just dropping some wisdom here.
Dropping some truths, man.
Dropping some truth bombs. So I wanted to kind of contrast. So I would say how Irene and I work with props and styling. So Irene, again, has a really beautiful, feminine style, but she really works at continuity. I would say when she's planning a shoot, the styling, the props, they all are consistent to work together to tell kind of a complete story. When if you look through her Instagram or watch her YouTube, it's like she's telling it could even be a period piece or an artist or somebody somewhere, and it's beautiful, but the styling is all part of telling that, that story. For me, on the other hand, I almost go the complete opposite, and I'm like, what would be the thing that wouldn't naturally make sense here? How can I mess with the viewer? How can I kind of it was, I saw the lake, and then I'm talking to some friends. I'm like, what's the styling here? How can we juxtapose this so that it isn't expected, And so that's where we were getting into, let's grab a suit jacket, and then let's pair it with a bodysuit, and let's grab some stuff and play. So it's intriguing. It's a little bit, but it's more down an art, an artist.
It's almost like a black and white photo, right? With your tones on it, right? There's no pop of color.
Totally.
Where Irene's photo, right?
It's vibrant. Right. It's all the colors, and that's also style, right? Even editing wise, I'm very. But that's also location, right? I mean, that location is two-tone. It's the lake and it's the cement wall. Yeah. And even our styling choice is black, and so much more monochromatic. But again, so it's just showing in both cases, intentional choices on our styling and our props made a huge difference to just bringing a subject and being like, hey, pose in this random place, right?
Now, do you convey that to the model when you're working with him? It's like, hey, get in this murky water and stand against this brick wall, right?
So I'll be honest, I think probably for both me and Irene, so I'll qualify that. Irene is great, and we're going to get to this a little bit later. Irene knows what she wants. Yeah. So Irene has a very clear idea when she goes into her shoots of what she's creating, what's the styling, how that, I think in a lot of cases, she almost has the visual in her head of what those images should look like before she's even shot them. I don't. My approach is a much more explored, and I'll get to that kind of at the end, but it's a lot more discovery. But I try to connect myself. That's why I'm a little bit more specific with who I work with. I will really work with people who are very creative themselves. And so, for instance, last show, we've shot some stuff together. I know that she will actually elevate, or in the same way I'm trying to push myself and capture some different angles and shots and try things. I know she will be on the other side of the camera doing the same thing, right?
Perfect.
So I'm not probably inviting someone I've never met, to say, hey, you want to stand in the, on the edge of a lake and it's, I'm looking at those things when I know that the person I'm working with is going to kind of bring an equal part to that shoot. But yeah, props. I do believe that ultimately taking the time and effort, especially if you're getting started, or you like the time you invest into those will move you from like an average photo, especially if you're getting into portraiture, to like starting to level your images up. And if you're not comfortable, you don't feel strong, at this phase with doing that yourself, ask friends. Almost everybody's got friends that have a good eye, or if you've got other photography friends who maybe are more comfortable with styling, like reach out, tell them your idea, get some advice.
Totally.
Bring someone else in.
Brainstorming, right?
That's the fun part. Number 5 is movement. This one's big for me. And this was probably, I guess from a product standpoint, this was where the R5, like moving from my 5D4 to the R5 really kind of changed things for me in terms of incorporating more movement, and kind of like specifically just because I could actually like throw the tracking focus on and like blast away.
It's crazy.
And so that's been a game changer from a like almost adding from a stylistic standpoint. But what I wanted to contrast here just kind of simply is, I think having a, especially from a portrait side in this case, you can have a style that's much more action oriented or action based, or like incorporate movement in a more significant way. And you can also incorporate movement in a really subtle way, right? And I think Irene does the subtlety really well. I've stood next to her while she's directing, and she's active, there's movement, and but it's subtle. There's this look, there's this kind of glance, there's this, whereas, this photo of mine on the left, I mean, we were like blasting away trying to get like a full, I've got like hair flips in here. Like I don't have that photo in this presentation, but we were getting, playing with a whole bunch of, much more active movement. And I'm a big fan, even stylistically, a lot of what I'll shoot is much more fire the burst. I'll shoot stuff even like it's a film frame, like I'm shooting what do you call it? Like a video, right? I'll just call action and I'll run something, and you get these really in the moment shots, but that's a very different stylistically than something that's like that perfect craft, like still like
for sure
beautiful portrait, right?
One's more polished. You can probably say
more polished, and there's almost no way to get the polish when someone's running at you or someone, and so it really comes down to style, right? And like what you like. But again, from a movement standpoint, I wanted to kind of illustrate that. And I think just invite the question just to, if you haven't explored movement, or you haven't kind of gone there, or you've left it to, if you're a portrait photographer, if you've left that to your subject, kind of thinking more critically, like how can I could I incorporate that more? Do I, in wedding photography right now, and like couple photography, like the whole blurry kind of filmy thing is really in. Like I'm seeing a lot of people playing with motion and movement, but that's a style, right? Like it's like, the like blur and the slow shutter, and so those are all tools, even from a technical standpoint, that you can incorporate in your work that really can kind of set your style apart from somebody else. We're getting there.
Number
6.
6, man.
We're moving.
Color.
Okay, color. So this is I think what's funny is this is the one that most people, like if you just think aesthetic or style, everybody's just like, look at that edit, look at that color grade, look at that, right?
But people always want to buy like Lightroom presets, right? They're like, I love this look, right? Can I just buy it and then plug it in? Right? But there's more to it than that.
So that's why this is 6th, is because in my mind, like you need to like learn all of you need to go through those other things. You need to take the time to kind of incorporate these different elements first, before you're even worried about, which preset am I using, or whose edit, or, and so I'm gonna just give you a brief like guess anecdote kind of moment on my editing, how that's developed, and maybe an encouragement for those, because I know a lot of people, they try like 20 different presets. They're like, oh, this looks cool on this. I remember being there where you'd see all these different looks. You're attracted to that edit, that look. You're trying this on your wedding photos. You're trying this edit over here on this like street shot. Ooh, those are cool, like over here for this event. But then everything looks like eclectic and it doesn't look like you. It looks like 5 other people.
Yeah.
and so if you're there, you might not be, but if that's where you're at, and you're just like, I have all these things, I like them, I don't know what's me because I'm playing with all of it. Stop. Pick one. First of all, I think what like my journey to kind of establishing that was, I just decided like I stopped looking at all the options out there. I stopped looking at everybody else's look, and I just found a basic. Early on for me, it was just like Visco had these like preset packs that were more film emulation. So at the time, I was like, I kind of like the Portra. I think it was like Portra 160 or something like that. It was a fairly standard kind of base. It was also kind of trendy back in 2014, so I wasn't exactly original. A lot of people were using it. But instead of jumping on the next 15 or 20 or 30 different looks that kind of popped up, I was just like, okay, we're going to start with that. And over the years, I just started modifying it. So then I would travel, modify, use it on something else, modify, go to Hawaii. Oh, it's green. It's not mountainous. Okay, modify. And at first that meant like a few different presets named after different places. But then I kept coming back to the kind of my main one. And what I started to realize is like you can actually, if you stick with it and tinker and then go to different scenarios, tinker, keep adapting your look and your editing style until it starts to become pretty universal. And I don't know if I got lucky, so I might have gotten lucky. Like maybe you try this and you're still frustrated and like, I'm sorry. But for me, sticking with it long enough actually got me to the point where I now edit off of a base kind of Lightroom preset that works for almost everything I do.
So we have like a question here. William Davidson says, speaking of style, Jonathan, what apps do you edit your images with? So
Lightroom mostly. Yeah. I mean, I'll use Photoshop every once in a while, but I would actually say, like, again, if you compare and contrast me and Irene, like the amount of time each of us would put in, like effort-wise, would put into one edit is probably significantly different. Just again, from a style standpoint, my style is more organic. I actually really just want the image to look almost like it was captured, like very kind of documentary. Yeah. It's like stylized documentary is almost how I would like frame it. My skin retouching is like next to nothing. I'll just like, a few blemishes. It's just like healing tool. Yeah. Maybe a light, if like the newer mirrorless cameras are a little sharper than like I was used to with the DSLR. So sometimes I might just smooth this, just a light little, to like take the edge off.
Lightroom gives you majority of the tools that you need.
Lightroom's incredible.
I'm like you. I rarely go into Photoshop anymore.
Yeah. Right? So especially from a workflow standpoint, it gets the job done. Yeah. And I've actually gotten myself to the point where literally two base presets. I got a black and white and I got a color. And that took probably 5 years, of like tinkering.
5 years in development.
6 years. Yeah. But I think for anybody that's looking, it's like find something you're like, just start somewhere and then push yourself to keep adapting that look until it becomes your own. And how that works with the rest of these tools, we've been talking about. But again, just to kind of use myself and Irene example, like even from an editing standpoint, you can just see from a tonal color standpoint, she's editing much brighter, looking at, keeping all of her vibrant, everything, like I desaturate a lot, like there's obviously it's not apples and oranges. It's not apples and apples because we're in completely different locations. Yeah. But it is a layer, right? It would have been fun if I got like raws from both of us for these to like show you guys a proper contrast. But all that to say, like the color is a piece, but I would argue that even at this point, if you saw both of these images straight out of camera, a lot of our style was already there before we even threw our respective editing, so all that to say, kind of in my mind, it's the cherry on top. It's important, and I actually think it's worth taking the time to like get into Lightroom, get into Photoshop, play around, define what that style looks like. And my encouragement is like keep tinkering, right? Once you will get to a point where you're happy, but if you're not happy yet, that's just a sign to keep stay uncomfortable, keep like playing, and you will hit that. It's just a matter of time. But it is, coming back to what we said earlier, it is a measure of doing the work.
Yeah.
It probably won't be buy somebody's preset and then be happy that your work now looks like theirs. Because it'll just look like your shots with their preset. Yeah. And again, like this is just, an example just from I just screenshotted kind of both of our, just to show, again, you can see continuity wise.
One's
like,
light, one's dark.
One's darker, but even also like just as a, Irene's continuity is often, here, a lot of similar locations, right? But you can also get style, and color and consistency out of shooting completely different things. Like for me, right there, I've got a night shoot with like red light. We've got some black and whites. We've got a wedding, some wedding photos. We've got a real mixture. But to encourage those of you that maybe like aren't as specifically defined as Irene's work is, maybe you like to shoot, like me, like you're like, oh, I want to shoot that and that and that and this. There is definitely a way to still establish a cohesive look and style, even if the work you shoot is varied. If you're taking, into account some of those elements, because there's some distinctive consistency there. Okay.
All right, now we're geeking out now.
Gear. Mostly going to talk about lenses because I think bodies are obviously important, but I would probably, Irene and I were talking and we said, if we were going back to our earlier photographer selves, we would probably invest more money into glass and spend less on bodies early on if you're looking at a distinctive look. Because lenses do give you a very distinctive look. And they're probably one of the, it's easy to say, oh, gear doesn't matter, like it's your eye. But I will say, if like my style drastically changed when I started adopting that 35 prime, and I was like, versus say a wide, like a 15 to 30, a wide angle or a 50. I shot a lot of 50 before. And same thing, Irene style looks like Irene because it's an 85 millimeter.
Yeah.
Irene's style doesn't, like, Irene's photos don't look like this if she's shooting 35.
No, and that's the thing. Like, it's a great example between these two, right? 85, there's compression to it. It's not, and it's a whole different look. 35 millimeter is much closer. You feel like you're right there.
And it also, again, when you're talking about what we gravitate to, 85 is pretty flattering. Yeah. Like if you think of from a portrait standpoint, it's pretty consistent. It's very flattering on the subject. You get a pretty natural, like look. 35, there's more distortion sometimes if you're.
It's not a head and shoulder portrait.
You know what I mean? It's but again, as someone who likes, I think it's inspired a little bit by fashion photography and some of these things where they push the wides and the weird angles, and sometimes you get a little distortion or you can kind of play. It's a lens that gives you that flexibility, right? Again, somebody who looks at environment, wants to show more of the space or the, I'm not going to get the depth that she'll get with the 85. I'd have to, but I will get to tell a story and frame something the way, that my eye naturally gravitates to in a way that...
people who follow along with our YouTube channel, they know 35 is my favorite focal length.
Really?
I love 35 millimeter.
35? 35 stay alive?
I don't know if we're going to go with that one.
No.
No, 35 for me, it was like a revelation when I shot. The first time I shot with the 35 1.4, I'm like,
oh, it was game changer.
This is amazing.
I picked up the lens and I was like, we're done.
All right. And like, this is more my style, right? I really didn't care for 50, wasn't my thing. 35 rocks. But yeah, 35-85 is a 1-2 combination for anybody out there. That is brilliant to walk around with.
Yeah, and I have an 85, so it's like but I find what's funny is I still, and like, so now this is maybe the encouragement to those of you who've like, maybe like finding a style or you're a little comfortable, then I think it's a great time to go, okay, you're comfortable, now pick up a different lens. Like if your style's been defined like mine over the last while as like, pretty wide angle prime, I'm kind of in that mode where I'm like, oh, I should pick up my 50 again, like, and just shoot 50, like force yourself, like. So
I've had people travel, and one guy in particular, he had a fixed 35mm lens. He traveled amazing places for 6 months, came back, and he had some amazing photos. And I said, well, what do you think? And he goes, oh, I love the 35, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I had no variety.
Yeah.
Said everything was 35mm.
Yeah.
Right. And there's chances where I wanted more portraiture, I wanted more telephoto, and what have you. Right. So it's good. You have your best friend lens, right, and then you have everything else you want to kind of go with. So it depends on what you're doing.
Absolutely.
If you're going out and shooting, you can do a whole shoot with a 35mm because you're so comfortable with it. But if you're going on vacation, I'm betting you take more than one lens.
Oh yeah. Or I find myself, I've still got a 24-70 that I definitely, that whole shoot actually. It was a rare occasion where, because I'm literally sitting on a paddleboard on the other side. Yeah, so fun fact, I wish I had a BTS for you guys. My brother was on the back of the paddleboard, like, letting him, like, okay, back up. And he was just like, back up, and I'm literally zooming in. So, like, a mode like that, I can't shoot 35 because I need to let the lens do what I would be doing, like, in terms of moving back and forth. But all to say, I do think when it comes to establishing, like, a photo style, starting somewhere, it's kind of the same as encouraging you to start with one edit, saying like pick one and then just dive into it, because I think we get too overwhelmed with choice, and so if I know early on the other tendency is like you want to have all the lenses. Like when I started out, I was like, oh, that one looks sick, and oh, I need that, And I'm not discouraging, especially as men who sell gear.
Working for the camera store, I encourage you to buy everything.
I was like, I'm not discouraging you from buying more lenses, but I am encouraging you to actually shoot with the lenses you buy. Because I think often we think that it's the next lens or the preset or the thing. And it's an excuse to actually not dig in and do the work with the gear we have, with what we have, right?
Yeah, no, it's just figuring out your style.
Totally.
And so, like a trick I use for a lot of people, if they're like, Dave, I don't know what I want to do a portrait lens. I want to do this. I really don't know, but I have like a super zoom lens, and I'm like, you know what? If you have a 24-70, for instance, and you're like, man, I'm thinking of buying a 35. I'm like, set it at 35, put some gaffer tape on it, and treat it like a 35.
No, that's good
and
advice.
See what it's like to shoot with a fixed 35, right? Forget the aperture, just see what it's like to fix.
Don't let yourself be moving it around.
Maybe you're a 28 kind of person. Maybe you're, more of a 70 mil, right? But it's a good exercise.
Or rent lenses as a start. Like that was something I did a few times, and then without fail, it would like sell me on it, like but still, I don't think it's bad either when you're starting out. Don't be afraid to buy more lenses. I realized for me, I had to go through the gear acquisition syndrome, and buy I'll try all these lenses, do all this stuff, to then find that I almost shoot with one of them now. You know what I mean? But if I didn't kind of try this one, shoot with this, I wouldn't have landed on the one that I'm happiest with, and then still know where those other ones, fit. This is just a little summary of the 35, but just an example of all kinds of different styles, compositions, but consistently it was that, I found that lens became my kind of go-to over the last few years. And I think there's something beautiful about learning a piece of gear so in and out that I was, even when I was traveling this summer, I threw the 24-70 on for a bit and I was trying to shoot with it, and I was like, oh man, it's so much option. I switched back to the 35 and it was okay, I'm in gear. And I'm moving way more, but it's funny how, again, it's a challenge to me to get out of my comfort zone, but it's also a challenge, a benefit of, getting, anyways.
So, there's some questions here, right? Or how are you doing for presentation?
I can wrap with this.
Okay.
How's that?
Let's wrap with that, and then
Let's
we'll
wrap with that. Take questions, because this is the last piece of original content that I had. So
jazz or classical?
Jazz or classical.
No rap?
Good way to end. No rap. So I just want to. I'll wrap with this. And this is a conversation I've been having with a bunch of photographer friends recently, and it came actually, Richard Bernard, he's a fashion photographer based out of Montreal, Canada ambassador. I've had the chance to do a couple events with him, and we chat. I had a background growing up playing jazz piano. He's, loves jazz, and we connected because we realized photographically we shoot like jazz. And I never connected this, the different things. But we realized that both of us approach the craft with a certain level of, yeah, you got the chords, like we've kind of prepared the loose song structure, but then when we get to the shoot, we're just ready to solo. Like we're looking to solo, right?
Yeah.
And there's a few other ambassadors and friends we've talked to that are like classical pianists, right? They have practiced the sheet music. They've drafted the song. It's like every detail is prepared. And so I think to encourage, that's in part, Irene probably falls a little more in the classical side. I probably fall a little more on the jazz side, right? And nobody's probably perfectly on the spectrum.
It is a balancing act, because as you get into photography and you're like, oh, I like this kind of look, this style, but I don't understand the technical sides of photography yet. And I'm still learning, what does shutter speed mean? What does aperture mean? What does it, all these things do? But over time you start getting more technical, but you go so technical for a little while because you're just trying to get the perfect shot, the perfect exposure, the perfect look. And then the artistic side of things kind of wanes a little bit. And then you can, once you're more comfortable with your camera, then you start bringing back more into that creative side of things.
Totally. Yeah. So I think it's just an encouragement to say, like, also figure out which one are you, right? Like, are you the person that like goes in and creates, where even from landscape photographers, it's like the bucket, it's like Peter McKinnon did that bucket list shot. Like the person who's like, I want this location with these, these conditions. It's got to look like this. I'm going to plan for months. There's people that, are looking for the
Well, this is what I like
eclipse,
about
and it's like you get it, and then when you get it, you got it, right?
This is what I love about portrait photography, is that nobody, no matter what gear they have, are going to recreate that shot exactly.
Totally.
Right? I can go out and shoot the Golden Gate Bridge, and it'll be, I can sit next to, the other day we were out at Wedge Pond, right? Beautiful location out in Kananaskis, and we show up and there's a dozen other photographers, right? And we're all like 10, 15 feet away from each other. And I'm like, well, how much of our shots are really varying very much at all, right?
Absolutely.
But if we had a model in front of us, right, nobody's going to get the same shot twice.
Totally.
So I do like shooting people like that.
Yeah.
But here's the
Let's
interesting,
Q&A. Let's Q&A.
So shooting portraits can be intimidating.
Yeah.
Right? Especially, do you ever photograph strangers or people on the street? Is that kind of your thing?
Sometimes, but go ahead
So
with the question.
how do you, are you shy? Are you, when you deal with a model, how do you interact with them?
So I would say, first off, disclaimer, I don't think I'm the best at like posing strangers. But maybe this is helpful because I'm not the best at posing strangers. So what I've found I do, obviously, like for my creative work, I look for people that I can jazz with, literally that I know they're going to be just as creative and we've connected and have met. Often for me, it's like I see value in getting to know people first and like building that rapport. But if it's someone like, let's say it's a wedding or it's somebody, I'm a huge movement guy, and just giving people things to do. So, for me at least, it's like I'm awkward in front of the camera if you flipped it on me, but it's like give me something to do, and like, oh yeah, you're gonna capture a more natural expression from me. And I think for most people who aren't models, giving them even just a slight direction, you don't have to like. I'm not great at being like, chin up that way and just a little bit, and then tip your. Some people are great at that. I'm not. So for me, it's more, hey Dave, like, let's just get you like leaning over here, or like look out this way, or walk this way. Or,
I'm already feeling awkward.
But direction, I think, and I think it's just activity, getting people to move, do stuff. For me, that's a huge, and not being awkward yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
Jim Bracker has a question. He says, this is a good one, starts in the beginning here. How does the biz background change how you do photography?
That's a good question. It should be better. I'll be honest.
Do you treat your photography as a business, or
I think a little bit. I think I'm in a unique place where I'm actually like very involved on the business side with what we're doing with Socality and building the organization there. And so I would say my business brain ends up getting tied up operationally running that. And maybe on a positive sense, photo-wise, I've been able to kind of do that in a more, it's like kind of a bonus, if that makes sense. It's space where I can take commercial jobs, I can do that stuff, but I'm not so focused on building a massive clientele so that I can pay the bills with that alone at this stage right now.
So here's a nice question.
Yeah.
So Darth Ledge says, have you handled difficult clients, and how do you handle their negative feedback? Clients are not always right, and sometimes there is a need to protect oneself. So you have your own sort of style. It might not be for everybody, especially if you're working for a larger corporation. We have multiple directors and multiple people approving. How do you take that? Is it a personal strike? Do you go home and cry? Do you?
No, I think there. you do. Graham's like, you do. You weep. You go home and you delete everything you've ever created. No, honestly, there's just give and take. I think there's a level of like. I think as you continue to grow, there's a level of confidence you have to have in your own work. But if you're working with other people, you have to recognize you're providing a service. Like when I go out and I make something for myself, I'm only accountable to me, right? If I go out, like if Irene and I are doing shoots like this that were pure creatives, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, like just us, friend for fun,
Totally.
content essentially.
Super fun.
But when I've had days where you like shoot something for a client, especially when I was doing more social media or like content, like brand work and whatever, and somebody goes, oh, this could be here. And you're just like, I had that happen once with one client where I took like it was actually a social media related job. They wanted it posted and shared, and it was like a branded thing. And the photo that I took, I knew was going to like deliver on social media at the time. Anyways, they were like, oh, well, this is not like, we want something more like this. So then sure enough, I post it, don't tag them, it blows up. I'm like, well, that was your loss, But at a certain point, you just kind of go, well, this is the client or the whatever, I am working for them. Like you do need to build your boundaries and your standard, but there's a certain level of give and take when you're creating for somebody else. And you can't take it personally. Like almost anybody who's done any kind of commercial or brand or client work is going to have somebody that doesn't see eye to eye, and you just kind of.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
And how has social media changed your approach to photography over the past few years with such heavier saturation of influencers and creators?
Well, that's a good question, because I think I got started in that, right? So like there are a lot of people start maybe more commercial or wedding or like, family or like pick your kind of thing. I literally started in just before like the whole influencer thing happened and all these, but my photography was shaped early on, I would say, by Instagram, like by what I was seeing, what people were creating. And if anything, I actually had to break out of that. Like I think shooting, I use Japan as an example, but just shooting landscape orientation. I know it sounds hilarious, but like, like I think so many people, we were talking about that earlier, like vertical video right now with like TikTok and Reels and all this stuff. It's now happening for video. It happened for photo first, right? Like I was in the photo phase where I would go anywhere and it's like, and then at a certain point you're like, wait, there's incredible compositions I could get if I just flipped it this way, And so my encouragement to anybody creating is it's like, if you're building a brand or you're building like something, social's kind of a necessary evil to an extent, depending on what you're trying to go for, right? You don't need it for a lot of things. But there's definitely things in this world where it sure helps to have, So if it's something that you see when you look at your business or your goals is worth having, it's a game you got to play. You got to do the research. You will probably have to sacrifice something. But if you're buried in it right now, do yourself a favor and then get out, go do, create, make things that are completely like don't care about what the algorithm wants.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you started off with a 60D and the kit lens. Have you ever
60D?
tried any other system? And what is the Canon mirrorless system done for you as a creator?
So my progression was 60D, then I went up to the 6D Mark I, like first gen.
Yeah.
That was huge, that jump.
Full frame, man.
Oh, like anybody, I think even just getting into like an entry level full frame, like if you're shooting crop, was like game changer for me. And then a little bit after, then leveled up to the 5D Mark IV Canon. And stuck with that for a while. I was kind of like, I was a slow adopter to mirrorless. Like, some of my friends were all like shooting Sony and doing all these other things. And I just loved my color. I just loved what I was getting with the colors.
Yeah.
And I was the one that was always like, like your autofocus, I don't need it. Like, this is good. And then the R5 comes out. And I had the privilege of like being involved with the launch, and they sent us a pre-production one. And I remember like, planned this shoot, went out there, and like I'm literally sitting there with it and like flicked it on the like burst mode and all this stuff. I also had like an 85-1.2, and they were like push it. Like, we want you guys to like really, it's like low light. I'm opening this thing like 1.2, and then I'm like a ways away, just like rapid firing, like handheld. I'm looking at these images being like, okay, like this is like, I was like whining about the autofocus just being kind of a gimmick and you don't need it. And then I was just like, this completely is someone who like composition's everything for me, right? Like being able to shoot, that changed the game. So I think if anybody was on the fence on the mirrorless jump, like the autofocus does empower you to really focus as a photographer on your job, which is capturing great moments, capturing compositions, even if you're shooting a wedding, you name it, right? It just, it's been huge.
I have to admit, switching to mirrorless is, once you start shooting it and you really see the benefits of it, it's really, really tough to go back. So you're not a studio guy.
No.
Yeah. But you shoot outside all the time, right? Do you incorporate flash into your photography at all?
You know what? I had a chance to, so I guess short answer, not much. We had a chance to do a project with ProPhoto a little while ago and like did a fun little challenge.
Because they're all about the flash, those guys.
Those guys are all about the light, all about that artificial light. And you know what? They kind of sold me on it a little bit. I still haven't, gotten into a place where I'm fully incorporating it, but I was impressed, because I was forced to kind of incorporate, some strobe and some, like into some natural light, just more out of a challenge. Like we did this whole photo challenge thing. And so I definitely see the value of it. I think a lot of times I'm just run and gunning. And so I know how to kind of make the available light work. But I think it's something that I would probably incorporate a little more, especially in like scenarios where light's really flat. That's what I found, or you're just like, you're just not getting that little bit extra. And there's ways to make it look literally almost undetectable as an external source, especially during daylight, right?
Yeah, good flash, right? If you want flash to be part of the image, you can make it look like that, right? But there's so many different ways of adding light.
To incorporate it in a really like subtle way.
And you look around, actually, when you like Calgary's becoming more and more involved in the motion picture industry, so you're seeing more and more stuff. And you'll be driving around at night and you'll see these massive lights projecting through a window.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
But they're shooting a
exactly.
daylight scene at night, right?
And that's that light shaping, right? So even if you're trying to craft a natural scene, so much of that's just looking at how do you position your artificial light in a way that creates that.
All right, last question here. It's a hard-hitting one. Philip Durand here posts, is your style inspired by outside critique of your work, or are you the sole critique of your own style?
Huh.
Oh, deep thinking thoughts here. That's a good one.
He's throwing us a real little fastball. Baseball season. That's a good question. I think,
because we're our own worst critics.
I am definitely my worst critic. I'm the person that will probably shoot like a whole bunch of stuff and then not share it. And then, I'm very, I would say like for the most part, not influenced by what somebody else thinks of what I'm making. I think I care, like, don't kid yourself. We all care to an extent, right?
So I don't read the comments on YouTube.
Yeah. But I think I care more about the people, like, I'll be honest, I look at the people that I respect. So let's just use Instagram. If I share something on Instagram or on social media and the feedback from people I look up to and I'm connected to, I'd say those are the voices I listen to. I'm not too worried about what a stranger thinks, whether it's negative or positive. And I think that's the importance of community, just even coming full circle and like the people you surround yourself with. It's like, you're always going to have people in your corner that have seen your journey, and they see the progression from year to year, month to month, week to week. And those are the people that are going to be in your corner celebrating your progress, your work. Everybody else, you're always going to have the noise, right?
Sounds good. All right, we're going to wrap things up here. Where can people find you on social media?
We're fortunate. We had a hack earlier on the week. My Instagram went completely down.
Oh, wow.
But it's back at Jonathan Zoeteman. If you look up Jonathan, start with a Z, you'll probably find me. But Zoeteman. I do have a website, but Instagram's probably the easiest spot to connect. And yeah, if you got questions or further stuff, like send me a message. Definitely love love kind of that part of all of this. So.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us. Thanks, Canada for sponsoring tonight's event. And the reminder that if you have registered for this event, you will be getting a special promotion. And if you haven't yet, simply email Evelyn. It's EVELYN at thecamerastore.com, and she will get that promotion off to you. I have to thank the hardworking crew behind us here who made this event go off without a hitch here, and just a few laughs in the background there. We have more TCS live events coming up here, so make sure you check out our website for all the new stuff coming up. And if you like what you saw, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our recent content that we've done with newest and greatest in lenses, and hopefully a whole bunch of new Canon stuff coming out next year. That's what I'm hoping for. So thanks again for watching. Thanks, Jonathan, for joining us.
Thanks,
and
Dave.
we will catch you again next time.
See you guys soon.